Welcome. This is Presenting in a Virtual World. We've got a brief webinar for you, and I'll be talking through some of the quick tips to making sure you are as effective as possible when you're in a virtual space or platform, and maybe building on those skills that you have when you're in real life. So we'll go ahead and kick off. My name is Jerry Brem. I work at a firm called the Executive Advisory. We're located in Encino, California, and our focus is the people side of business. And in many cases, that also includes focusing in on communication and making sure managers and leaders and executives have the credibility and the skills they need to do the jobs they need to do. So this is a topic that I love presenting and making sure people are as effective as possible when they're in front of other people or a camera, as you will. And some of that is because we're constantly talking and we're constantly trying to share messages with others. So this is a skill that's incredibly relevant, regardless of the venue. Here's the agenda we're going to cover. Understanding the link between communication and credibility. So that idea of when I'm in the space, am I setting myself up to be believable, to make sure that my message is clear? We're going to review the virtual basics, some of the things that can influence being in a virtual space that we don't necessarily have to deal with when in person. And then a couple of behavior shifts to make sure that, again, that influence is impacting the overall message in a positive way. So I've got a couple takeaways from today. And the first one is you are never not making an impression. And I've had some folks push back on me and say, no, I was in that meeting and I had my camera off. That's still making an impression. In fact, I hear from executives saying it's incredibly frustrating to be in a room with cameras off by the participants because it's as if they were in real life, spinning their back to the table and refusing to engage. That's probably not the impression you want to be making in the meetings you attend. If you are going to be the speaker, if you're going to be covering some of the content of a meeting, you are obviously going to be making an impression in some way. So we just want to be purposeful with that. And before we move forward, I'll ask you just to think about the last meeting that you're in, virtually or otherwise, but thinking about what impression did you make? What did they think about you? How would they have described you? And then think about the next meeting you want to go to, potentially virtual. What would they be saying about you in that meeting if it went really well? How would they describe you as a speaker, as a participant? And some of that comes down to the behaviors we show up with. It goes back to credibility. So I've got credibility dimensions here, and there are 5 of them. There's a lot on the slide, but I'll walk through each column briefly. And the idea here is we probably have 2, maybe even 3 of these that we easily handle. It's just a strength of ours, but there might be 1 or 2 of them that could use a little bit more focus when we're trying to make sure that we're coming across as fully credible to our audience. So the first one on the left-hand side is competence. And this is honestly, through my coaching experience, the one where most people feel the most comfortable. They want to make sure people think they sound smart. They want to make sure they're showing up with the right information. That said, we need to be able to prove that we can deliver results to come across as competent. We need to be concise, specifically in a virtual space. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. And that's by being direct. We want to make sure that we are, again, providing the right kind of data and that it comes across in an organized fashion. That conciseness is key. And while we always want to have conciseness as one of our skills, in a virtual space, it's so much more important because we're in usually tighter timelines in terms of sharing the information. And we've got different kinds of barriers between us and our listener. The next column is professionalism, which is different based on the industry you're in or the expectations of your team or how your client might expect you to show up on a virtual meeting. So whatever professional dress is for you, you apply that. You would want to make sure you're clear, you've got appropriate gestures. Your vocal speed, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, is going to be a little bit more critical in a virtual space. How you use volume for effect, the use of pauses, and that our tone sounds conversational. Certainly we avoid sounding condescending or monotone because those will disengage your listener. When it comes to vocal speed, Looks like, and this has increased over the last 10 years, most people in the US speak at about 150 to 200 words per minute. So that's quite fast because our listening comprehension speed is usually between 120 to 140. Now, this is not to get you to talk super, super slow, but it's just a realization most of us can slow down just a little bit. And if we do find we've been talking quickly, we can add pauses. And those little pauses just help the information we just covered have a chance to settle in with our listener. The next one over, and in my experience with coaching clients and when I've taught this content before, likability is one that most people don't really think about or spend time on. And this is that idea of how well are you listening? Are you taking time to smile? Are you greeting people as they come into the virtual space, particularly if you called the meeting? Do you show interest in them? So listening is a little bit different because they might all be muted. So the listening with your eyes, you're paying attention to body language, you're paying attention to chat if there are questions, if there seems to be confusion. You are willing to listen to them when they have a question for you. And that moves into showing interest in their perception, in their thoughts, in their opinions. The next one over is character, which is a little bit tougher to do in the moment because we need to sort of prove over time we have character. But this shows up typically when maybe you make a commitment to do something or follow up with something. You prove your character, you earn that credibility by then following up and hitting that deadline. There is also moments where maybe there is a mistake or an error that we have to admit to in the room. That is actually greater credibility to say, yes, I've made a mistake, than it is to try to shift blame or ignore it. And then admitting we don't know, particularly if it's a little bit out of scope of what we planned on covering, is going to be more powerful as well. And I'm going to guess we've all been in a room where somebody acted as if they had the answer or knew what they were talking about and didn't. And there is zero chance that that added to their credibility, particularly the next time they went into a room. People were going to go in guarded with, can I trust you? The last one on this list is eye contact. We'll talk about this a couple of times during this webinar because it is so critical, particularly in the US. We use eye contact as a way to discern whether I can trust somebody or not. So this idea of looking through the lens as opposed to your notes or away or a different screen, it's going to allow people to believe that they can trust you. This is very US centric. Not every culture has this as an expectation. But if you work with US employees, peers, colleagues, clients, try to think about that eye contact through your camera is going to be quite critical. And the last one on the list is passion. And this, again, it's a little bit odd thinking about passion, but it really is that sense of excitement. If you're not interested in what you're talking about, it's really hard to make anybody else interested in it. So you want to initiate that contact with them when they come into the space. Maybe you show gestures to show excitement about it or to help count something off. You want to think about the forward momentum that you might be trying to build through whatever your topic is. So if there is an issue, can you offer up solutions? If there are tasks to be done, can you think about the next action steps and call those out? So that would indicate that you are passionate about something happening. As I said before, we probably have 1, 2, maybe even 3 of these that we do quite naturally. There is a chance there's 1 or 2 of these you haven't spent a lot of time thinking about. And when we get to this space of looking like we care, we can tap into some of these behaviors to make those small shifts. I'm going to go into some of the specifics or nuances to being in a virtual space. And as I do, I'd like you to go back to that idea of the next meeting you might go into, virtual or otherwise, how would you want people to describe you? And if it's knowledgeable, if it's engaged, if it's excited, what kinds of behaviors might you have to do in order for that to be seen by others? Do you need to smile more? Do you need to make sure you're listening and checking in with folks? So Some of the things that are specific to a virtual space is thinking about that audience can be a little bit different. In the room, when we're live and in the same space, we can pick up on the energy. We can actually tell when somebody isn't paying attention. But in a virtual world, that's much tougher. They might have camera off. They might be multitasking and have multiple tabs open. We don't know what's going on with them. They might be distracted by something that's happening around them. So we need to make sure our message, going back to being concise, is there, and we are paying attention to what's going on, and we're using as many tools as we can to make it feel interactive. First, you can send out as part of your agenda or meeting invite, hey, please come prepared to share your thoughts on this topic, or I'll be opening up for questions during this meeting, and then using reaction buttons or chat features or Q&A to make sure people can stay engaged. Clarity goes back to that conciseness piece. This is where your visuals are going to be far more important, because you may be a tiny box on their screen in terms of your face, but the message you have is on your slides. So see if you can use a bit more imagery as opposed to words, because that's going to be more powerful. It also gives a better chance of having an emotional reaction depending on the imagery or the message, as opposed to just a bunch of text. And then we want to remind you that less is more. So less on the slide will be more visually compelling than more on the slide. And with that, creating those strong visuals, we really want to make sure you think about your camera position. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as well. But this idea of people are trying to connect with you. So we've got the eye contact that we've talked about, but sometimes camera angles make that really tough. So is there a way that you can rethink what they might be seeing, your visuals are compelling, and that they are not going to be distracted by either you, your background, your environment, and what you have on your slides? I'm going to break down the next section into how we sound, what is going to be seen by others, and what's going to be said. So the first one is how we sound. And we are coming through microphones, and the quality of the microphone in your system, that can be hit or miss. The space that you are talking in could have a lot of reverb, or could be much bigger if you're in a conference room at your office. So just thinking about how you might sound can have a way of improving the dynamics for your listener. Other things to think about are pace. How quickly are you speaking? I already mentioned the speed at which people speak. We can all slow down just a little bit. I'd like to encourage you to think about it. What if you were in the hallway having a conversation about this topic with someone? That actually will probably change your intonation. It will actually make you sound more conversational, and it will help you with the phrasing so that ideas can be set aside and sort of pop based on what you wanted them to really hear. The idea of really warming everything up. This is what you have to work with, your jaw, your mouth, all those muscles. So thinking about articulation and enunciation. Are the consonants being hit in a clear way? Pa, ka, ga, ta. What about enunciation? Some of those sounds that can get lost in the back of the throat. The NG kind of sound, ng, or L or R, all of those can sometimes get a little muddy. So warming things up to begin with helps you know that you're ready to talk about whatever is on your agenda. And a couple of quick tips would be, try doing a tongue twister, but do it really slow. And that way it allows you to hit all the sounds in it. And you'll find out if there are sounds that are trickier for you, or just at least warms things up. I have a sibilant S, so I try to warm things up so I don't do a heavy hitting and have that S pop on the mic. When we've got this sense of how we sound, and you can also, another quick tip would be recording yourself, whether it's through your video platform or you can use your phone. Just listen to how you sound and see if you can catch if there's any quirks or oddities in terms of breathiness or how you tend to phrase things. When we think about what's going to be seen, it goes back to those camera angles can be really important. And eye contact is critical to make sure people feel like you're talking to them. You'll see on my screen, this was from a few years ago. I had to remind myself to smile. And I put a little Post-it note right next to my camera lens to remind me, look there, because we get caught up in looking at wherever our screen is. So I have worked with folks and they tend to have a screen they're looking at over here, and they've got a light over there and a camera up there. And so you get these strange angles of people versus them looking right down the lens. We also need to be cognizant of our facial expressions, and there are a million of them, and yours are unique to you, but they are going to be sending messages about how your audience should feel about the content. One of the things I found out when I started recording was I have a furrowed brow typically. And so when you furrow your brow, it actually changes your vocal modulation. And I sounded more serious. And I needed to think about, how do I open up my face so that it could sound more optimistic and more engaging? Lighting is, well, it doesn't matter what your facial expressions are if you can't see them. And I've worked with quite a few folks that have been backlit because they've set up their office space so their windows are behind them, and the viewer is just seeing a big glow of light without actually necessarily seeing the person themselves. So think about your lighting options. What might be ways to just make sure you've got a healthy glow? There's a little bit or enough light on your face. And then I'll move off this quickly. Think about the visual clutter around you. There are folks that when they don't choose to use a background, what you notice is a very messy desk behind them, or files piled up, or maybe it is something distracting on their walls. And they're in a conference room. I had somebody that was information on a whiteboard that should not be going outside their organization, but they didn't realize somebody hadn't erased from the previous meeting. So these things that you just want to take a moment and quickly evaluate your surroundings. What is this going to look like? I ended up using a very simple background so that it was, hopefully, if you glanced over at me, not distracting. I've got our logo, just in case you were taking a quick glance at it, but otherwise, nothing is going to be popping in from the background. There won't be movement behind me, and it gives something uniform and less distracting. We want people to focus in on our message. We want them to focus in on the critical visuals we might be sharing. And that leaves us with what's said. So this is where most of us spend our time. What am I going to say? What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? I would just want to remind you that shorter sounds more confident. We want to use simple English. We don't need to be polysyllabic. We don't need to try to sound smart. You are the subject matter expert of whatever your topic is. So talk in the terms that will be understood by your audience. If there is specific jargon or acronyms and you know your audience knows them, use them. If your audience isn't in your space, figure out ways to talk about that in a layman's terms so that you don't lose anyone. The other piece to this, and it goes into conciseness, is we want to make sure we catch any fillers or hedgers. Everybody says, everybody's got an in there. We've all got some kind of quirk. We might say, you know, it's like, kinda, or a million others. One of the ways, if you're recording yourself to hear how you sound, you can also listen for, do I plug in any fillers or hedgers? And if I do, I can actually re-record and practice by going very slowly. If I say or I just stop, go back, I say that section again without the sound. Because what we're doing is we're vocalizing our pauses with or. So we want to just move through that, and silence becomes the spacer. Same thing if we've got maybe a pattern or habit of using one word to get us between each idea or every slide. And if that's the case, we just, again, use silence. It's like putting a period at the end of a sentence. I wanted you to remember first, my first big takeaway was you're never not making an impression. My second takeaway, tell them what they need to hear, not everything you know. We no longer are in school. We shouldn't have to show our homework. But I will tell you, when I work with folks, particularly people who are in the legal profession, engineers, IT professionals, researchers, they are wired to want to show how they got to their conclusion or why this is so important with a lot of background data. Most listeners don't need that. The assumption is you know what you're talking about. So what I like to think about, because I have some of this issue myself, is I think about what's the least I can say in the room. For this particular topic, this particular audience, what's the least I have to say? And that's my skeleton. And then I add meat to the bones based on what sections or what do they specifically need to have a bit more information on. And I've done my homework, so I'm ready to answer any questions they might ask. With that, we're going to be thinking about purposeful communication. So here's my quick step setup that I do. And the first one is, based on this audience, what do they need to know by the time I'm done talking? Whether I've got 5 minutes or I'm taking 5 hours to teach a workshop, what do they need to know by the time I'm done? Are they going to take this information and try to persuade somebody more senior to do something? Are they going to use this to make a decision? Or is it educational only? I just need to understand what it is they need to know. I also want to go in really clear about how I want them to feel about this. What emotion do I want to evoke in them? Should I hope that they feel calm? Should I get them excited about this? Maybe I want them to feel a little anxious about what could go wrong, so they take action immediately, which moves into what action do I expect them to take after this meeting? Or is there action they can expect from me after this meeting? So what is the know, feel, do for any conversation I'm going to go into allows me to stay focused and really gauge what it is I want to be able to zero in on or add more to. I don't need to do data dumps up front. Now, in a virtual world, there are going to be interruptions. It is just the way it works. So we have external things. There could be noises or spouses or pets or kids. We don't know what's going on in anybody's world. Even in the work world, somebody could be sitting in an open workspace. And so there's a lot of distractions. We need to be a bit more flexible, that it's not unheard of for somebody to have missed our main point and we might have to repeat ourselves. We want to stay focused on that know, feel, do. So at least we can say, okay, that section took longer than I expected. How do I narrow in to make sure I can stay within my time limitations? Maybe I'm one of many and they've said, we've got 5 minutes or 10 minutes to cover your section of this agenda. Then I can use those time expectations on the interruption to say, that's an interesting question. I don't think we're going to have the time to go into that during the 5-minute block that I've got today, but I'll follow up with you after this meeting. Or maybe I've set the meeting, so I actually send out a clear scope and agenda. So then I can say, no, that's a little out of scope of what we were hoping to cover today, but let me circle back with you right after the meeting and we'll see if we need to set up another meeting to cover that particular content. If there are a few things that are just coming up that you don't either have the information on, or it is a bit of a tangent out of scope of what you want to cover, then you can use a parking lot. And this is a little bit tougher in a virtual space, because what you're going to do is actually say, hey, I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm just going to make a quick note, but I'm going to follow up with you on whatever the issue is or the question is. And then if you can date and timestamp it, it heightens your credibility. I'll get back to you before end of day. So we've got this sense of being able to control the narrative, if you will, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. That's what I've got for you today. If you've got any questions about what I talked about, or maybe you're even interested in doing something for an intact team that's a little bit more interactive or robust, I'm at gbrim@theexecutiveadvisory.com. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, and you can also reach out to us directly at our website. We've got other webinars and workshops that are available. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.